So I don't know why they do this. Is it on purpose? Is it with bad intent? Do they not know? How could they not know? So I'm talking about people in the establishment media. In this case, it's Bakari Sellers, and he went on TV today and said that not only is Bernie Sanders not popular with African Americans, but that ship has sailed, meaning he has no chance of being popular with African Americans. Now, of course, that's not remotely true. I'm going to give you facts right now. Did he give any facts? Of course not. Of course not. It's just a smear. It's the same smear they do every single time. But look, we were at Politicon with Bakari Sellers. He was on a lot of panels with a lot of the Young Turks hosts, Kyle Kalinske, etc. He's a good guy in person, and so I don't know what to do with these guys. Everybody wants me to be civil and say like, oh, he's a wonderful human being. But Bakari, you don't know the polls. You know the polls. So why do you say that? So, all right, on the off chance he doesn't know the polls or doesn't understand political context at all, I'll make it incredibly clear, okay? By the way, Bakari Sellers is an establishment Democrat. He's been, he ran for office as an establishment Democrat. All he says on television is points that help and support establishment Democrats, does not agree with progressives, and can't stand Bernie Sanders. I don't know. I'll leave his motivations out of it. Whatever, okay? That's important context. And he can't sit here and tell us that he likes Bernie Sanders. He's never said a positive word about him in his life. In fact, later in that same interview, you know what he said? I mean, Bernie Sanders might have marched with Dr. King, but he dismissed it. That's not important? He said, what did you ever do for African Americans? I don't know. Fighting during the civil rights movement is pretty good. Do you ever see the picture of him chained to an African American woman in the 1960s? He said, if you're going to arrest her, you got to arrest me with her. Okay, so, and then he's like, what did you do for African Americans in Congress? Nearly every legislation that he fought for, higher wages, for recently criminal justice reform, to help improve the lives of African Americans in 1,000 different ways. You guys criticize him for being the most liberal senator, for being the most progressive senator. You say he's so progressive, it's unrealistic how much he would help all those folks, whether they're black, white, Latino, etc. Every black person in this country would have health care along with every white person, every Latino, etc. And you guys say you shouldn't do that. Every black person in this country can have free college for their kids. And you say Bernie Sanders is too progressive, that he shouldn't do that for anybody in this country, including African Americans. So make up your mind. Is he too liberal or is he not liberal enough? That doesn't make any sense. All right, so let's get to the numbers. So right now, Bernie Sanders is more popular with African Americans, according to polling, than Kamala Harris is or Cory Booker. They're both running for president. They both happen to be African American. Now, does that mean that black folks in America have definitively decided they like Bernie Sanders better than they like those African American politicians? No, it doesn't mean that. What it means is that not enough people know Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. So if you're knee-deep in politics, you can think like, really? I mean, those guys, those are really well-known senators. They're running for president. You got to remember, though, most of America is not knee-deep in politics. So to be fair to Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, it'd be out of context to say African Americans definitively like Bernie Sanders better than those two candidates. Okay, but do they like Bernie Sanders? Yes, they do. Do you know, among whites, he has only a 3-point lead according to a Gallup poll, Bernie Sanders does, okay? So meaning that it's 49 favorable, 46 unfavorable, in that ballpark. And so he's got a 3-point lead there, okay? Among African Americans, he's got a 3-to-1 advantage, a 300% lead. It's 64-21. So how is that not popular? That appears to be enormously popular by a 3-to-1 margin. So why do you say he's not popular? Why do you say that? Okay, so I'll break down their common excuse in a second, okay? But if you're asking for context, hey, Jenks, 64%, are you sure that's that high, though? I mean, it's not 99%. So it's because a huge percentage of people in this country don't follow politics at all. So they've never even heard of Bernie Sanders or have no opinion of him. Now, that's more true of the African-American senators that I mentioned. They've never heard of Kamala Harris. That's why her approval ratings among African-Americans is not as high as Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, okay? So, again, I'm being fair to those guys. But 64, is it a good number? Well, here's a good way to judge it, okay? In a different poll, in Quinnipiac poll, Oprah Winfrey came in at 70% popularity. Just as a person, forget running. This was before she was even thinking of running for president. She's not thinking about that anymore. But she polled a 70% among African Americans. I think most people, if you ask them, would say that Oprah Winfrey is deeply popular among African Americans, but it was 70 to 15. So why wasn't she at 90%? Because believe it or not, there's a bunch of people in America that have never heard of Oprah Winfrey or have no opinion about her. So how did Bernie Sanders do in that same poll? Because it'd be good to compare him to Oprah Winfrey to see if, hey, look, is he as popular, less popular? Okay, I mean, obviously he's going to be less popular than Oprah. Wrong. He's at the same 70% approval as Oprah Winfrey, but in fact, Oprah Winfrey has 15% disapproval among African Americans. Bernie Sanders only has a 10% disapproval in that poll. So he's actually more popular than Oprah Winfrey among African Americans. And those are people that do know him. So tell me again about how Bernie's unpopular with African Americans. Why do you keep perpetuating that mythology? I'm trying super hard not to call it a lie, but if you don't know those numbers, okay, you might not know one poll or another, but overall, you don't know that Bernie Sanders is deeply popular among black people in this country. You know that, so what do you want me to call it? It's a lie. It's an obvious lie. Okay, so last thing. They say, well, Cenk, I mean, we're so sophisticated, please. We're pundits on cable TV. Did you know that Bernie Sanders did not do well with African-American voters in the early states in 2016? Yes, everybody knows that. You're not remotely sophisticated. So Bernie Sanders, for example, got killed in South Carolina, and he didn't do well at all with African Americans. You want to know why? Do you know what percentage of people in the country, let alone African Americans, knew who Bernie Sanders was in 2015? Get a load of this. I hope you're sitting. 76% of Americans had no idea who Bernie Sanders was. 3/4 of the country had never heard of him when he started running for president. So, on the other hand, the Clintons, well, have more name recognition than anyone in the country and had enormous goodwill with African Americans. Some earned, some not so much. So, to take that giant name recognition advantage that Hillary Clinton had and to pretend that that was a fair contest is laughable. That means you know almost nothing about politics. Okay, now you can say, hey, don't cry about it. I'm not crying about it. He lost, okay? Hey, sad day. He didn't have enough name recognition, and he lost in South Carolina. He did better in other states, but he didn't have enough name recognition by Super Tuesday. We can go on and on about that. That isn't the point. Remember what I said to you in the beginning. It wouldn't be fair to Kamala Harris and Cory Booker to say Bernie's more popular than they are with African Americans. Why? Because they don't have that much name recognition right now. That's the same problem that Bernie Sanders had last time around. So if you say Bernie Sanders is not popular among African Americans because of how he did on Super Tuesday, you're leaving out the giant context of his name recognition overall. They didn't know him to begin with, whereas they knew the Clintons really, really well. If I used your standard today, but I'm not as unfair as all of the establishment, and we actually give you context, we're clear with our perspective, and we're honest about the facts. If I was as duplicitous as the people in the establishment media, I'd just tell you, oh my God, Kamala Harris is so unpopular with black people. No, the jury's in. The ship has sailed, as Bakari Sellers would say. But of course the ship hasn't sailed. They're going to do a whole campaign. And that's not fair to her, and it's not fair to Bernie to judge him on South Carolina or Super Tuesday numbers from last time around on African Americans. And for God's sake, is there any journalist on TV, when Bakari Sellers says that, is anybody going to say, hey, wait, Bakari, did you ever check a poll? Is he currently popular or unpopular with African Americans? And give the context that I just gave. No one. It makes you wonder, do they know nothing about politics? Or are they purposely keeping those facts from you to smear Bernie Sanders over and over again? Because they are deeply biased against progressives.